Just weeks ahead of its final release on June 2nd, Street Fighter 6 is available as a free demo on PlayStation 5, Series X and S, plus the older PS4 and PS4 Pro models. The install is 16GB in size. It's also a rather heavily stripped down sample of what's to come, and in fact this demo is nothing like the online beta we had late last year. A beta which had 7 characters, 6 maps, and could just afford to be more generous given it was only live for a limited time. By comparison, this newer, free offline demo reins the options in, leaving us with 2 characters to work with in its arcade mode, Luke and Ryu, out of a full potential roster of 18. And then there's 3 stages: Genbu Temple, the classic dojo training stage, and lastly the Old Town Market, found only in the Extreme Battle mode. So in other words, there's really a whole lot more to see of the arcade portion when the game finally releases, but that's not the only highlight of this demo, because for the first time, this opens up Street Fighter 6's new single-player World Tour mode, if only for a small portion, letting you roam this Metro City area. This World Tour mode is a fun experiment so far, a unique take on the Street Fighter concept as powered by the RE engine for the first time. You'll design weird or wonderful characters using this creation suite, you'll freely explore its streets, and you'll engage in street fights with random passers-by, and then, of course, reap the spoils if you win in the form of XP. Vitality, defense, kick strength, punch strength, all get upgraded with each level, something to bear in mind when sizing up higher ranked foes. Either way, between this taster of the World Tour mode and the arcade portion, we're now able to see how Street Fighter 6 is shaping up across every console. Much may change for the final June 2nd release, but for today, between PS4, PS4 Pro and PS5, how are the game's visual settings scaling to lower powered machines in order to lock down 60fps? Equally, how is the Xbox Series S version set up in order to target 60fps? And last of all, what of the extra modes on PS5 and Series X, including its 120Hz output support? Let's find out. Based on the demo, it's hard to overstate the ambition of Street Fighter 6, the ambition of its visual upheaval, and above all, the push to cross-platform and cross-generation development. Just as a recap then, and looking back to Capcom's work on Street Fighter V in 2016, the last game was a completely different beast. For a start, it was an Unreal Engine 4 project focused purely on base PS4 and PC, and to this day it remains a PS4 exclusive on console, that is with enhancements on newer PlayStation systems via backcompat. Character complexity and materials were a significant upgrade on Street Fighter 4, and the lighting was a significant leap too. It impressed at the time, for 2016, but yes, moving to Street Fighter 6 today, the bar of quality is just so much higher. Character models, for a start, are sculpted with a significant boost in detail, and so Ryu is more defined. His muscle definition is more accurately chiseled out, right down to the veins streaking down his arms. The RE engine's strength in physically based rendering is also deployed here, resulting in more natural lighting on materials for hair, cloth, and skin shaders. There are some nice visual touches on top of this as well, where sweat builds up across Ryu's body during a fight, affecting the way it's lit in the process. It's all very impressive stuff. Before we get to the comparisons then, it's worth pointing out some visual oddities in the demo. Now, bear in mind this is an early build and potentially the game will get numerous tweaks by launch. Still though, right now, the World Tour mode has obvious technical quirks and really doesn't live up to the high visual bar of its excellent arcade mode. Whether it's the jarring low refresh of the NPC animations in the distance, which at times update at a choppy 10 frames per second by my count, whether it's the glaring NPC pop-in just meters ahead as you run across Metro City's main square, or even the bare-bones shop interior details, the obvious SSR reflection artifacts on the ground, it's all rather hard to ignore, to be honest. And all of these points apply to every console version I've tested, from base PS4 up to PS5 or Series X. Clearly, of course, the attraction for the competitive scene is in Street Fighter's arcade mode, and that is shaping up nicely, but there's huge potential here for a proper single-player adventure, and so yes, I'm hoping at least some of these points get touched on by the game's launch. To the comparisons then, and let's kick off with a look at the PlayStation Trio first, focusing on the arcade mode. The RE engine has a proven track record of scaling well to systems old and new, and Street Fighter 6 really is no exception here. Whether it's PS4, PS4 Pro or PS5, you fundamentally get the same core arcade mode experience. In model detail, hit impact effects, and environmental flourishes, it's almost all a match. However, it's worth stressing there's cutbacks. In a three-way split, the first obvious point is in resolution. Base PS4 renders typically at a native 1080p, PS4 Pro guns for 1440p, and then last up, PS5 runs at a native 4K resolution. Dynamic scaling is possible, but these are the typical values. I have PS5 set to the resolution mode in this case, but the performance mode also renders at 4K for this arcade battle. More on the differences between resolution mode and performance mode later on, but for the arcade, it's fair to say all three hold up pretty well. Moving on, there are a few other differences as well. First up, there's an additional depth of field effect on PS5 during fight intros. More noticeable though is the texture resolution on PS5 is boosted all round over the base PS4 and PS4 Pro versions. So notice in this close-up of Ryu's fists, there's a lower quality material on his gloves, the skin shaders on the older PS4 and PS4 Pro. The stitching, the arm scuffs are all far less defined, and the two last-gen machines share the same lower setting. Likewise, a side view of the Genbu Temple shows a lower quality floor texture, and in fact, zooming in, it's clear what else is cut back on PS4 systems. The ambient shading, for example, around plants is reduced on PS4 Pro, and even more so on base PS4, where the shading is practically absent. The density of those plants and the petals on the floor is also dropped on the last-gen consoles compared to PS5, and lastly, perhaps most outstanding of all, is the approach to reflections between the three. Here we see PS4 Pro drops to a lower accuracy screen space reflection technique compared to PS5's crisper mirror image in the lake. But as for base PS4 on the far left, SSR is seemingly absent, and it instead relies on a cube map texture. In action, none of these differences stand out massively. The native 4K image on PS5 with its high quality SSR, ambient shading and environmental detail are all nice to have, but switching over to the base PS4 in full view, sure the drop in image quality is felt, the loss in shading is visible, but it's still a great result for the now aging hardware. Even the missing SSR on base PS4 isn't really such a big issue. It scales well, in other words, even in direct comparison, but if we switch to the World Tour mode, the results are less impressive for base PS4, in the demo at least. Interestingly, SSR is re-engaged on PS4 for the World Tour mode, which does mean the city streets reflect back the neon signs above. The downside though, well, it's the obvious issues with texture pop-in. This applies equally to PS4 Pro as well, but we see ground textures pop in and out of lower quality assets on PS4, often just after transitioning from menus or battles. In fact, the correct high-grade texture sometimes takes 10 seconds or more to load, and worse still, once a texture does load at last, it still has a tendency to revert back to the low-quality texture. All of this will ideally be fixed up for the final release because otherwise, World Tour mode is similar in its visual setup on PS4, PS4 Pro and PS5. But what of Xbox Series S versus Series X? Well, here we see Series S typically runs at a native 1080p resolution, while Series X runs with a 4K target, so long as resolution mode is selected, just like PS5 then. There is no resolution or performance mode toggle on Series S to speak of, and so it's a one-mode-fits-all situation. You get 1080p at 60fps, and in fact, the settings on Series S often fall closer to the last-gen PS4 Pro version here. You get lower resolution textures for skin, fabric, and rocks, often glaringly so next to Series X. There's lower SSR quality on the Lake 2, plus there's reduced foliage density in the Genbu Temple stage. Oddly enough, in gameplay, you'll notice Ryu's beard doesn't render properly in battle, which is likely a bug for this demo. All round, Series S does take a pretty big cut in visual features, down to 1080p with low quality textures, SSR and more. The upside being that it means this 4 teraflop machine is at least able to prioritize 60fps. So, onto the key topic of performance, and at this point, let's explain what the resolution and performance mode toggle actually does on PS5 and Series X. Here's PS5 in example with the resolution mode on, and in regular arcade mode battling, this gets you a locked 60fps line, and it also runs at a native 4K. No problems whatsoever. Even during finishing moves, there's barely much more than a single frame dip on the graph reading, whether it's the Genbu stage, the training dojo, or even the extreme battle mode in the old town. This is a superb showing, and absolutely on form for Capcom and Street Fighter. Now, if we switch over to the performance mode on PS5, very little actually changes for the arcade portion of the game. The performance mode remains optimized to run at a 4K resolution and sticks to 60fps throughout as well. All of this applies to Xbox Series X of course for both modes, which runs at 4K at 60fps either way. Switching over to the World Tour mode, the graphics mode toggle has much more relevance here. Kicking off with the PS5 again, in its resolution mode to start, this all runs at 3840 by 2160, and to be fair, in exploring Metro City, there's no frame rate drop whatsoever. It's 60fps all through here, except there's a problem, in that any actual battling with random passers-by triggers a 30fps cap, so long as the resolution mode is selected. Not only that, but the 30fps cap used here has uneven frame pacing, making the motion of characters appear less smooth and less consistent. Coming from the fluid 60fps of the arcade mode to this is obviously quite jarring, and yes, it's certainly not in the tradition of Street Fighter's design. All of this again applies on Series X in its own resolution mode. The open world roaming is absolutely rock solid at 60fps on Series X, but those battles never feel all that responsive at 30fps. And of course, the uneven frame pacing doesn't help here. The solution? That'll be the performance mode, which has the World Tour Adventure render at 2560 by 1440 instead, in order to reach 60fps in those battles. It's an image quality hit in other words, but I've got to say, at 1440p the end result still looks pretty decent. Both PS5 and Series X also achieve a locked, stable 60fps with no issues so far. It's problem solved then, and exactly what we'd have expected going in. To be honest, it might have been better to leave performance mode enabled by default, given most people will notice the relative sluggishness of 30fps gameplay. Now, as an aside, the Xbox Series S version, of course, has no graphics mode toggle at all, and runs at a native 1080p in both the arcade and World Tour modes. And the good news, for all its visual cutbacks in dropping resolution, pruning back settings, Series S does at least hit a locked 60fps in both modes, in classic 1v1 battling and the open world roaming. Even the World Tour battles themselves run smoothly in the big city, the only exception being this early tutorial fight, which sadly does seem to drop frames to almost the mid-50s, unlike on PS5 and Series X. What of the last-gen consoles then? Well, PS4 and PS4 Pro have no graphics mode toggle, but do offer a low latency option at 60Hz. More on that in a second, but the bottom line here is that both PS4 and PS4 Pro achieve a locked 60fps with VSync for regular arcade mode battles, which for most Street Fighter fans is where the focus is, and so the demo is pretty encouraging. Neither PS4 console slips up in their delivery here. However, the situation does change when we swap over to the new World Tour mode. Taking PS4 as an example, the explorable Metro City area runs with an unlocked frame rate, but rarely truly hits the target 60fps. More so, it's between 30 and 50fps for most of the area, and likewise, cutscenes run completely uncapped, with little success in hitting the full 60. So, from the beginning, this isn't exactly ideal, but the bigger issue is the battling, which caps to 30fps, again with uneven frame pacing. All of this applies for PS4 Pro too, of course. In summary, arcade mode runs perfectly at 1440p and 60fps on PS4 Pro, but World Tour mode exploration is an uncapped 30 to 50fps experience, while the battles cap at 30fps. Last up, what of that low latency mode toggle? Well, this is available on every machine, including base PS4 and PS4 Pro, and enabling it essentially turns off the VSync setting, in theory reducing input latency by allowing full screen tearing. On PS5 and Series X, however, this does go a step further. Here, VSync is disabled, but it also switches to a 120Hz output mode, provided your TV supports it. We'll be looping back to test the actual input latency improvements with the final game, but the key point here is, even with 120Hz output enabled on the newer consoles, and even with VSync disabled, the game logic is still capped to 60 frames per second. In the arcade mode on Series X, for example, it's 60 FPS gameplay in a 120Hz container, and with constant screen tearing. And in fact, if you have the resolution mode selected as well, the World Tour battles still run with a 30 FPS cap within that 120Hz output. So this low latency mode isn't totally fulfilling its potential, in the demo at least, but it might offer some improvement in response. Overall then, there's much more to come on Street Fighter 6 when it lands. We're close to the game's full release on June 2nd, but as a taster, the demo flags some interesting design choices. The biggest point here is that the arcade mode is absolutely golden, regardless of which platform you use. It hits 60 FPS on every machine, no issues whatsoever, but questions still hang over how the World Tour mode will run in the final build, and if last-gen console users are destined to play it with only a 30 FPS cap. More to come soon then, but if you did enjoy this video, feel free to like or subscribe, and don't forget to hit that bell for instant notifications as any new video lands. To get a high quality version of this video, check out our Patreon at digitalfoundry.net, and to get in touch directly, just use Twitter. But from me for now, thanks for watching.